Morning and welcome to Morning Moments. Today I have a special guest. She's an author. It is a audio interview only, and I am so glad to bring KT Griffiths to Morning Moments. She has written a book called Mental Illness, the Silent Disease, and I am just so blessed to have her with us. Welcome, KT, to Morning Moments.
Thank you so much. And the title actually is Shh. That's the first part. So because we don't talk about our mental illness very much. It's something that's usually kept behind closed doors, kept between family circles or external friends, a few friends that you might want to reach out and share. But it is a shh, we don't want to talk about this.
Yeah, I didn't know how to introduce shh,
Yes.
but I'm glad you did that. I saw in the book it said shh, but so shh, mental illness, the silent disease. Uh, Thank you so much. Can I ask you just to share with us your story when I ask the question, what do you do and why do you do it?
Well, so far my journey has been long. It started very young with my child, and parents, I would say be careful who you let your children play with, because something happened in a neighbor's house. I do not have all the details, so don't think I'm excluding details, but something happened that scarred her little being probably for the rest of her life. And counselors cannot get all that out either. So, we'll just move on. Then so acting out, the cutting started. Cutting, it was not exposed for 5 years to me. And I took her to the doctor, and it was paper. Who's going to think you're cutting with paper? But she cut with paper for 5 years. And then I would take her to a hospital because, oh my goodness, I cut myself, mom, and it's too deep. And I had no idea she was cutting herself. I thought she fell, she did this or that. These are things to look for. These are band-aids in the bathroom. Mom, I need a band-aid. Just be aware. Be aware of isolation, of your child not wanting to come out of their room. This is why I wrote the book, because there's so many parents that need to know that we're all in this. These things have happened to me. They've happened to you. We've experienced things together. We can relate to stories. And in my book, I have a lot of stories. So there are things in there that you can relate to. I've had a mom that her child was bipolar, and she came up to me with tears in her eyes, and she goes, oh my goodness, I can relate to so much in your book, but this lady is one of the private ladies. She would never tell anybody else her story. And then I had another friend came up, and she said, oh my, your book. She goes, now I know what mental illness is. So if you're seeking to find out what your friend or coworkers going through when they start explaining their stories, I have some good information in my book that will give you information to understand other people or relate to them at the same time. So, I actually held my first mental illness conference, and it was a very successful a weekend. And that led me, from the book, it led me to that. And I was just, it's like, I want to get the word out that we can survive as parents. And we also have hope for our children, that our children will be successful in their, like in their job, in their school. Our children are the ones that are sensitive. They get bullied. They're the ones that end up in the principal's office. I mean, things just happen when we have super sensitive children. And that kind of is not a diagnosis for mental illness, but sometimes it falls into that. It's just the type of child that it is, because they're so sensitive.
Yeah, I have dealt with and helped so many families along the way. And because of being, and many that watch the show know I'm a retired psychiatric nurse. But in my work with as a psychiatric nurse, I've seen as many family situations as the patients and how it affects the
Mhm.
whole structure, the whole organism of the family. And it's not a easy fix because it's a long process sometimes of what happens to not only the individual but the family members that love them as well.
That's true. Um, she's actually the youngest of my six children. And so the other children were out of the home. And so she felt a huge abandonment as they were getting married, going to college, different things that affected her. I had no idea. I had no idea that the abandonment issues were so deep in her that borderline personality kind of took over her being with that abandonment issue. I mean, there's just so much to learn as we walk through this process. And like I said, this has been a very long journey. At, she's been on the street. She's lived couch hopping. She's lived hotels. She's lived behind dumpsters. I mean, she's done it all. And with that is a rocky territory, and it's very dangerous.
And when people have and parents have children of that have mental illness, we're given clinical names and diagnosis, and we could go
Mhm.
clinically and read that from the
Mhm.
DSM-5 and whatever the sources are, but it's so sterile and so sometimes it's so difficult to get a hold of. It's so nice to be able to hear support from those who've gone through it themselves, right?
Right, exactly. Yes, to me, you can just throw all that book into one word: is chaos of the mind. It's just there's so many. We've been through so many treatment programs with her that everybody gave her a different diagnosis because in some way they want to feel like they have the answer. But bottom line, nothing's going to change her unless she wants to change herself and the Lord. The Lord will have to intervene to get to her heart for her to want to change. And right now, Satan has a pull, the Lord has a pull, and there's free will. So we can't forget that the free will is still working in her life. And my other thing that I add to that is let go, because at some point I have to let go and let God do this. I cannot try to manipulate or control everything that happens with her. She's going to make her own decisions, and I have to be okay with whatever that is, even if she chooses to be on the street. I have to be okay. I can pray for her. That's always an answer, and God hears my prayers. So I know that he's there. I know that he'll take care of her, and he has rescued her more than once. She's been in very tough situations, and the Lord has always rescued her. And I'm very thankful for that, because some parents, they've been through the hard part. They've been through the suicide. They've been through some harder things. And I have taken her to the hospital for suicide ideations, and it can get that bad. But don't ever think that you can't call 911, because they're there to help, and it gives you a pause. And sometimes the separation is not a bad thing between your child and you while you're working through an idea of what just happened. So I feel like the hospital's there to help. I also feel like psychiatrists are there to help. Medicine, if your child's in a state that needs medicine, then go ahead and do that. Don't say, oh, I can't do medicine, because sometimes they need that bottom floor before to catch them before they fall too deep. And medicine will give them that plateau for a while. And it's up to them to want to change and maybe get off meds. Maybe it's not a lifetime, but it does give them a stop so they can have a breath.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of meds will do for patients is to give them that so they could get their thoughts together so they could make the right decisions. Still, it's up to them to make those decisions, but gives them the opportunity to be in a right mind where those decisions are can be made. And with a lot of racing thoughts and a lot of things going
Mm-hmm.
on, it's very hard sometimes just to make sense of it all. And but with that, and I'm so glad you said that, because uh, medication can be such a important part to all of our lives. It doesn't matter if you're Christian or non-Christian. It can still be helpful in those times of need.
Right. True. I'll explain one thing. When she was going through her high school years, she would get so depressed that she didn't want to get out of bed because the racing thoughts kept her up all night long. And by the time it was time to wake up, that's when she fell asleep. So now she's in a sleepwalking trance. I mean, I can't wake her up. She can communicate to me, but I didn't know she was still sleeping in a very deep sleep. And the doctor said that was a side effect from depression, which was interesting to me. I didn't know that. So if
Yeah.
I touched her on her arm, it was like every nerve ending would be standing on edge, and she would be, that hurts. And I'm like, I barely touched her. And she would say, feel my forehead. And I would. And there was no fever, but that's how her body was communicating to her. This is painful. This is as deep and painful as it gets.
Yeah.
And, I just want parents to be aware.
And just because you don't feel that, or you haven't seen anybody else
Hmm.
feel that or act that, doesn't
Hmm.
mean that they're not going through it. And
Hmm.
God's made us all as individuals. And it's so important not to put everybody in one box of
Hmm.
this is the way to get better.
Hmm. I agree for
Yeah.
sure. I do feel, for the parent that the Lord will walk with you through your issues or trials. It's hard. It's hard being the caretaker of someone that you can't control, first of all, and you have to trust God to control or help in situations. And the Holy Spirit's the one that guides you. So just if you don't know Him, it would be hard to get through all the things that I have gotten through without knowing the Lord. So I would suggest seeking that.
You've seen the book cover as I and some sites of where you could get that book. You could get it in Amazon and wherever
Hmm.
fine books are sold. You could just pull it up by name. I did some research and it's easy to find. Please get that book and pass it on. Especially if you've got if this hits home to you and this is things that you're going through. It's very important that you get the research and information and the information such as this book to be able to get the help you need as we close this interview today and as we move on, before you go much further after this interview is over, I want you to stop right as soon as this interview is over and pray for KT. She's got the mother's love. She's got her heart broke still and many times about wishing that her daughter would have done differently and family just like many other family members. So she needs your prayers, folks. Continue to have her daughter in prayer and have her family in prayer. As I usually say, they need your prayers and you need the practice.
Hmm.
Really pray for KT and her whole family that God would continue to be with them as they continue a journey that they didn't choose, but they are taking this and being a champion for those who maybe can't speak for themselves. KT,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much for sharing your heart today.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Please pass this interview on to others. I know in my listening audience there are people who really need to hear this. So please pass this on. Keep coming back to Morning Moments, and may God richly bless you. Thank you.